Chosen one, why does your obedience feel like punishment? Why does every step toward God feel like you're walking on glass barefoot, bleeding, alone? Why do you lie awake at 3 a.m. with this crushing weight on your chest, this whisper in your spirit saying you've done something terribly wrong, but you can't remember what? Listen to me carefully. What I'm about to tell you will shatter everything you thought you knew about your relationship with heaven. You didn't break divine rules out of rebellion, you broke them out of innocence, and when you did, heaven collapsed. I can feel some of you sitting there right now, your hands trembling, your breath catching in your throat. You've felt it, haven't you? That strange heaviness, that sense that something shifted in the spiritual realm, and you were at the center of it. Not because you sinned, not because you turned your back on God, but because you stepped into a dimension of calling that the old rules were never designed to handle. Picture this with me. Imagine the pillars of heaven, ancient, immovable, holding the architecture of divine order for millennia. Not from rebellion, but from the sheer weight of your assignment, pressing against structures that were built for ordinary believers. The angels didn't gasp in horror. They turned their heads in silence, because they knew, they've always known, you were never meant to fit inside the boundaries that comfort everyone else. Before we go deeper into this mystery, and beloved, this is a mystery that will explain every moment you felt like a stranger in your own faith. I want to pause and honor something sacred. Thank you to every single one of you who has supported this message through super thanks. Your generosity means more than you know. You're not just giving, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here. Your support, your time, your attention, it all matters. And if this message is already piercing through the veil of confusion you've been living under, go ahead and plant that seed of faith. But right now, if your heart is already trembling because you know this message found you for a reason, if something in your spirit just whispered, "This is me," type "I hear you, Lord," in the comments. Let heaven see your response. Let the angels take note that you're ready for the truth. Here's what they don't want you to know. Here's the revelation that will either set you free or terrify you into running back to spiritual mediocrity. Heaven did not collapse because of your sin. Heaven collapsed because your calling is heavier than the rules designed to protect ordinary people. You are not in trouble, chosen one. You are in transition. And what comes next will require you to understand exactly which divine law you broke and why breaking it was the only way forward. Have you ever done something for God that felt completely right in the moment, only to discover later that heaven went silent? Have you ever reached out to save someone, to fix something, to protect what you thought was holy, and felt the spiritual atmosphere shift like you just stepped on sacred ground you weren't supposed to touch? Have you ever wondered why your most passionate acts of obedience left you feeling more isolated than your moments of weakness ever did? Listen to me, beloved. What you're about to discover will rewrite every guilt-ridden prayer you've whispered in the dark. You see, there's a profound difference between rebellion and revelation. Rebellion says, "I don't care what God thinks." But what you did, what you experienced, that wasn't rebellion. That was a chosen vessel colliding with a divine boundary you didn't even know existed. And the crash wasn't your failure. It was your introduction to a level of calling that most believers will never touch. Let me take you to the wilderness of Sinai. Numbers chapter 20. Moses, the man who spoke face to face with the Almighty, who carried the tablets of stone, who led 2 million people through an impossible desert. This wasn't some novice believer. This was God's chosen deliverer. And yet, in one moment of desperation, he struck the rock instead of speaking to it. God had given clear instructions, speak to the rock. But Moses, exhausted by 40 years of complaints, frustrated by the endless whining of a people who seemed determined to miss their destiny, lifted his staff and struck twice, and water gushed out. The people drank. The miracle happened. But Moses would never enter the promised land. Now here's what your pastor probably never told you about that moment. Moses wasn't drunk. He wasn't in rebellion. He wasn't worshipping false gods or turning his back on heaven. He was trying to serve a thirsty nation. He was operating out of decades of experience. The last time they needed water, God told him to strike the rock. But this time, God changed the rules. And Moses, in his desperation to provide, crossed a line he didn't see coming. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever felt punished for trying to help? Have you ever felt abandoned by God right after you poured out your heart in service? That's because you stepped into a spiritual room you did not know was under construction. Move with me now to 2 Samuel chapter 6. The Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in Israel, is being transported back to Jerusalem. It's a celebration. Music fills the air. King David himself is dancing with all his might. This is a holy moment. But then the oxen stumble, the ark begins to tilt, and a man named Uzzah, acting purely on instinct, purely out of reverence for what was holy, reaches out his hand to steady it. He wasn't trying to steal it. He wasn't mocking it. He was trying to protect it. And the moment his hand touched that golden surface, he fell dead. Right there, in front of everyone, for trying to keep God's presence from hitting the ground. Let me ask you something that's going to cut deep. How many times have you tried to save something God was allowing to fall? How many times have you reached out to steady a relationship, a ministry, a person that God was deliberately shaking? How many times have you interrupted a divine process because you couldn't bear to watch something sacred hit the dirt? You weren't being disobedient. You were being compassionate. But compassion without discernment can become interference with destiny. Fast forward to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is being arrested. The soldiers come with torches and weapons, and Peter, loyal, passionate, protective, Peter draws his sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. He's defending the Messiah. He's fighting for what's right. He's standing up when everyone else is falling back. And Jesus rebukes him. "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Peter thought he was protecting God's plan. He didn't realize he was interrupting it. Here's what I need you to understand, chosen one. Every single one of these men, Moses, Uzzah, Peter, they acted out of desperation or devotion, not defiance. They crossed divine boundaries because they loved too deeply, cared too much, felt too intensely. And that's exactly what you did. You didn't break the rule because you were careless. You broke it because you were chosen for something the rule was never designed to accommodate. Think about your own life right now. That moment when you tried to save your marriage and God was calling you to surrender it. That season when you fought to keep your job and heaven was trying to promote you out of it. That relationship you tried to rescue when God was removing them to protect your destiny. That ministry you tried to hold together when God was dismantling it to build something greater. You thought you were failing. But you were crossing a threshold. You thought you were losing God's favor. But you were being identified as someone whose calling is too heavy for conventional boundaries. Comment, "That was me," if you've ever crossed a line while trying to do the right thing. Because you need to see you're not alone in this. You need to know that thousands of others have stood exactly where you're standing, feeling exactly what you're feeling. But here's the revelation that's going to shatter every ounce of shame you've been carrying. The rule you broke was never meant to punish you. It was meant to identify you. It was meant to separate you from those who play it safe, who stay comfortable, who never risk anything for the kingdom. It was meant to mark you as someone willing to step into rooms under construction, willing to touch what others fear, willing to love at a level that costs everything. Moses died on the mountain, but his legacy shaped nations. Uzzah died beside the ark, but his death revealed the weight of God's holiness. Peter's sword was rebuked, but his passion became the foundation of the early church. And you're not done. You're not disqualified. You're being refined for a dimension of authority that requires you to understand something most believers never learn. But what happens when heaven itself has to restructure because of who you're becoming? You know that feeling when someone you love stops talking to you mid-sentence? When the phone goes dead right in the middle of the most important conversation of your life. That's what happened in heaven the moment you broke the rule you didn't even know existed. But here's what breaks my heart, chosen one. You thought God went silent because he was angry with you. You thought the heavens shut their mouth because you disappointed the Almighty One too many times. You've been carrying this crushing weight for months, maybe years, believing that the silence meant rejection. You were wrong. Let me take you somewhere most believers never see. Let me show you what happened in the courts of heaven the moment your innocent obedience collided with divine protocol. Picture the throne room. Angels in mid-flight, carrying prayers from earth to the Father's ears. The 24 elders lifting their voices in worship that never stops, never sleeps, never fades. The sea of glass reflecting the glory of God like liquid fire. The cherubim and seraphim crying, "Holy, holy, holy," in a rhythm that's been unbroken since before time began. And then you prayed. Not just any prayer, beloved. Not the kind of prayer that bounces off the ceiling and falls back into your lap. You prayed the kind of prayer that only comes from someone who's been broken enough to be dangerous. You prayed from a place of such desperate faith that heaven had to respond. But your prayer asked for something that required God to bypass his own established order. The scrolls dropped. Did you hear that? In the spiritual realm, there are scrolls. Revelation 5 tells us about a scroll sealed with 7 seals that no one in heaven or earth was worthy to open except the Lamb. But there are other scrolls too, scrolls containing the protocols of heaven, the divine order, the rules that govern how God interacts with humanity. And when you prayed that prayer, when you stepped into that dimension of faith, those scrolls slipped from the hands of the recording angels and scattered across the crystal floor. The oil lamps flickered. You know about the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25, don't you? 5 wise, 5 foolish, all carrying oil lamps. But do you know that heaven itself has lamps? Revelation 4-5 speaks of 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. When you broke that divine rule accidentally, those eternal flames stuttered. Not because they were going out, but because they were adjusting to a new frequency. The heavenly choir fell silent. I need you to understand something that's going to shatter your theology. In Revelation 5:11, 1-2, we see 10,000 times 10,000 angels singing around the throne. That's a minimum of 100 million voices that never stop praising. But there's something Scripture doesn't tell you. There are moments, rare moments, when even that choir pauses. Not in judgment, in awe. You thought heaven was angry, but heaven was stunned. Think about Job for a moment. Job 1-6 tells us, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." Heaven has council meetings, divine conferences, moments when the Almighty consults with his heavenly hosts. And, beloved, your name came up in one of those meetings, not as an accusation, as a situation that required heaven itself to reorganize. You've been feeling punished, haven't you? You've been sitting in this spiritual silence, thinking you did something terribly wrong. You stopped hearing God's voice with the clarity you once had. Your prayers feel like they're hitting concrete. The Bible that used to speak to you now feels like it's written in a foreign language. You wake up at 3 in the morning with this gnawing fear that you've crossed some invisible line and God has turned his back on you. Let me tell you what really happened. When Moses went up Mount Sinai to meet with God, Exodus 24-18 says, Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. And he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days of silence from the people's perspective. They thought he was dead. They thought God had consumed him. They panicked and built a golden calf because they couldn't handle the silence. But Moses wasn't dead. He was being transformed. He was receiving the tablets. He was being repositioned for the next level of his assignment. You are in your 40 days, chosen one. You're in the cloud. And from down here, it feels like abandonment. It feels like punishment. It feels like you've been forgotten or rejected or cast aside. But from heaven's perspective, you're being fitted for a new dimension of authority that the old rules couldn't accommodate. Jeremiah 33:3 records God saying, "Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." Great and unsearchable. The Hebrew word for unsearchable means inaccessible, fortified, cut off. God is saying there are dimensions of His glory that are behind walls, locked away, kept secret from ordinary believers. But you're not ordinary, are you? You've never been ordinary. That's why you've always felt different. That's why church services that satisfy everyone else leave you hungry. That's why the silence hurts so much, because you were built for a level of intimacy with God that most people never experience. Heaven didn't collapse in judgment. Heaven collapsed in rearrangement. The furniture of divine order is being moved around to make room for what God is about to do through you. The protocols are being rewritten. The angelic assignments are being redistributed. And yes, it's causing chaos in the spiritual realm. Yes, it's creating a season of silence that feels unbearable. But chosen one, chaos is just order being transformed. If you've been in a season of silence, if you've felt the weight of heaven's reorganization pressing down on your spirit, type "Speak, Lord," right now as a declaration that you're ready to understand. Tell the algorithm, tell the angels, tell God Himself that you're not running from this anymore, because what I'm about to show you next will explain exactly which divine rule you broke, why you broke it, and what heaven has been frantically preparing while you've been sitting in this agonizing silence. You thought you were losing your mind, didn't you? For the last 6 months, maybe longer, something has felt fundamentally wrong. Not just bad luck, not just a rough season, something deeper, something you couldn't name but felt in your bones every single morning when you opened your eyes. Let me describe what's been happening to you, and I want you to pay attention to how many of these land in your chest like stones dropping into still water. You've felt watched, not by people, by something unseen, like invisible eyes tracking your every move, every decision, every whispered prayer in the dark. You walk into rooms and the atmosphere feels thick, heavy, charged with something you can't explain. You've felt spiritually blocked. Your prayers used to flow like rivers, but now they hit the ceiling and fall back down. You open your Bible and the words look foreign. You worship and feel nothing. It's not that God abandoned you, it's that there's something between you and heaven that wasn't there before. Opportunities have been collapsing. That job that was supposed to be yours? Gone. That relationship that seemed ordained by God? Dissolved. That financial breakthrough you prayed for? Delayed again, and again, and again. It's not just disappointment anymore, it's a pattern, a relentless, crushing pattern that makes you wonder if you're cursed. You've experienced sudden loneliness unlike anything you've known, even in your own family, even surrounded by people who claim to love you. You feel isolated, set apart, like you're speaking a language no one else understands. Your children don't call as much. Your friends have drifted away. You sit at the dinner table with your spouse and feel like you're dining with a stranger. Your dreams have been fading. Not just the dreams you have at night, though those have become darker, more confusing, more exhausting. I'm talking about the dreams you've carried in your heart for decades. The vision for your life, the purpose you thought God promised you. They're not dead, but they're dimming. Like watching a light bulb slowly lose its power until you're sitting in shadows wondering if the light was ever real at all. And the anxiety, dear God, the anxiety. It comes from nowhere. You wake up at 2 a.m. with your heart pounding and you don't know why. You're sitting in your living room in broad daylight and suddenly panic grips your chest like a vice. There's no reason for it, no trigger, no explanation. Just this overwhelming dread that something is terribly, terribly wrong. Does any of this sound familiar? Because if it does, I need you to like this message right now. Not for me, for you. So you can mark this moment, this exact moment when you stopped thinking you were crazy and started understanding what's really been happening. Here's what they didn't tell you in Sunday school. Here's the truth that most pastors are too afraid to preach because it sounds too mystical, too dangerous, too far outside the comfortable boundaries of religious routine. You've been walking through wet cement. Heaven poured it around your feet to keep you still while they rebuilt the pillars you shook. You thought you were stuck. You thought you were being punished. You thought God was holding you back from your destiny. But the opposite is true. You were being held in place because your assignment is so massive, so world-altering, so spiritually explosive, that if you had moved forward before the infrastructure was ready, you would have been crushed under the weight of your own calling. Think about Exodus 19:12. When God descended on Mount Sinai, he told Moses to set boundaries around the mountain, put limits for the people around the mountain, and tell them, "Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death." Why? Because the presence of God was so heavy, so holy, so overwhelming that ordinary people couldn't survive proximity to it. You've been kept at a distance, not because you're unworthy, but because you're being prepared for proximity that would have killed the old version of you. Every delay has been divine protection. Every closed door has been heaven saying, "Not yet, not like this, not with the limitations you're still carrying." Every moment of loneliness has been stripping away your need for human approval so you can stand in the terrible, beautiful isolation that comes with carrying God's voice to a generation that doesn't want to hear it. Job 42:5 records the moment when everything shifts. After all the suffering, after all the questions, after all the silence, Job says, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." The cement was setting. The foundation was being poured. And when it finally hardened, Job didn't just return to his former life. He stepped into double. Your life didn't fall apart, chosen one. Heaven fell into alignment. But here's what you need to understand. As we move forward, and this is critical, the cement is almost dry. The pillars are almost rebuilt. The spiritual infrastructure that will support your next chapter is almost complete. Which means the question you need to answer right now, in this moment, is not, "Why did this happen to me?" The question is, am I ready for what happens when the restraints come off? You want to know why God let you break the rule? Let me tell you something that's going to shake the foundation of everything you've been taught about obedience. There are two kinds of divine laws in heaven's architecture. Some laws exist to protect heaven from humans. They're boundaries, guardrails, lines drawn in cosmic sand to keep mortal chaos from contaminating eternal order. But then there are other laws, laws designed to protect humans from heaven, because, beloved, the full voltage of God's presence would incinerate an unprepared soul. You've been living your entire life thinking all rules serve the same purpose. They don't. And the rule you broke? It wasn't put there to test your obedience. It was put there to contain your destiny until you were strong enough to carry it. Let me paint you a picture that will never leave your mind. You were a hurricane walking into a sanctuary built for candles. Every step you took, every prayer you prayed, every moment you pressed deeper into God's presence, you were generating spiritual force that the old structures couldn't handle. The pillars weren't crumbling because you failed. They were crumbling because you outgrew them. Do you remember Moses at the burning bush? Exodus 3:5, God said, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." But here's what most preachers won't tell you. Moses wasn't standing on holy ground until he showed up. His presence sanctified that dirt. His calling was so weighty that ordinary earth became sacred the moment his feet touched it. That's you, chosen one. You don't find holy ground, you create it. But the religious world has spent decades convincing you that crossing divine boundaries is always sin. They've taught you to stay small, stay safe, stay inside the lines. They've made you believe that every time you feel God pulling you beyond the familiar, you're being tempted by pride. But what if, and hear me clearly, what if that pull wasn't temptation at all? What if it was promotion? Think about Peter, Matthew 14:29. Jesus said, "Come," one word. And Peter did what every rule of nature said was impossible. He walked on water. But the other 11 disciples, they stayed in the boat, safe, obedient to physical law, dry, and completely missing the miracle. You've been Peter your whole life, haven't you? While everyone else stayed comfortable in the boat, you heard a voice calling you to step onto the impossible. And when you did, when you broke the unspoken rule that says ordinary believers don't walk where only Jesus walks, the religious folks gasped. They called it presumption. They called it pride. They warned you that you were going too far. But Jesus called it faith. Here's the truth that's burning in my spirit right now. Every patriarch, every prophet, every history maker in Scripture became legendary by breaking a rule that everyone else obeyed. Abraham left his father's house when family loyalty was sacred law. Moses killed an Egyptian when "thou shalt not kill" was already written in his conscience. David ate the showbread when it was reserved for priests alone. Jesus healed on the Sabbath when rest was the fourth commandment. They didn't break rules because they were rebels. They broke rules because they carried an assignment that was bigger than the boundary. And now, right now, as I'm speaking these words, some of you are feeling something rising in your chest. It's not pride, it's not rebellion, it's recognition. Your spirit is finally understanding why you've always felt like a stranger in normal Christianity. Why worship services that satisfy everyone else leave you hungry. Why the same sermons that comfort the congregation make you restless. You weren't made for candles, beloved. You were made for wildfire. But here's where it gets dangerous. Here's where heaven itself had to restructure around your calling. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new." Most people read that as personal transformation. But what if it's cosmic transformation? What if when God births a chosen one into their full identity, the entire spiritual atmosphere has to recalibrate? You think you broke the rule accidentally, but God orchestrated it intentionally. He let you cross the line because staying behind it would have killed the very purpose He planted in your DNA. The collapse you felt wasn't heaven rejecting you. It was heaven making room for you. If you feel the truth rising in you right now, if something in your spirit just exhaled for the first time in decades, comment, "I receive my identity." Let heaven witness that you're done apologizing for being too much. Let the angels record that you finally understand. Because here's the revelation that changes everything. You broke the rule because you outgrew it. But now the question screaming in your soul is this: if the old rules don't apply to you anymore, what rules do? If you're walking between realms, disrupting normal spiritual structures just by existing, then who governs your life now? You want to know what God was doing during those years you felt abandoned? You want to know what heaven was building while you were breaking? Let me tell you something that's going to shatter every assumption you've made about your suffering. While you were crying yourself to sleep at 3 a.m., convinced God had turned His back on you, there was a construction project happening in the heavenly realm, so massive, so intricate, so specifically designed for you that every angel in heaven had to be reassigned. Listen to me carefully. Your tears weren't falling into a void, they were falling onto blueprints. Think about Job for a moment. Job 42:10 tells us, "After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before." Twice as much. But here's what most people miss. God didn't just restore what Job lost. He rebuilt Job's entire destiny architecture while Job was sitting in the ashes. The restoration wasn't the miracle, the reconstruction was. And while you cried, heaven built. Every night you questioned whether God heard you. There were angels being pulled from their posts and reassigned to your case. Not because you were in danger, because you were in development. The spiritual infrastructure around your life was being demolished and redesigned to handle a weight of glory you couldn't carry before. And while you doubted, heaven built. Your destiny scroll, the one written before you took your first breath, it's been rewritten, not erased. Rewritten, expanded, upgraded. Revelation 3:12 says, "I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God." God Himself has been editing your life's manuscript while you thought the story was over. Do you understand what's been happening? Those contracts you signed in your youth, those agreements you made out of fear, out of survival, out of not knowing who you really were, they've been dissolved. Colossians 2:14 declares that God has cancelled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. But it's more than cancellation, it's replacement. While you were barely surviving, heaven's legal department was drafting new spiritual contracts with your name on them. Contracts that carry authority you've never walked in before. Agreements that give you access to realms that were previously locked. And while you waited, heaven built. I'm talking to the grandmother who raised children alone after your husband walked out. I'm talking to the grandfather who lost everything in the recession and never fully recovered. I'm talking to every senior citizen who has spent the last decade wondering if your purpose died with your youth. Heaven has been building, not repairing. Building from the foundation up. Think about Nehemiah. The walls of Jerusalem had been rubble for decades. Everyone had accepted that they would stay that way. But Nehemiah 6:15 records, so the wall was completed in 52 days. 52 days to rebuild what had been destroyed for generations. Why? Because when God says it's time, the building happens at supernatural speed. Your generational curses, they didn't just get interrupted, they got terminated. Every pattern of poverty that stalked your family tree, every cycle of abandonment that poisoned your bloodline, every spirit of defeat that whispered, "This is just how our family is." They've been served eviction notices signed by the King of Heaven. And while you suffered, heaven built. Heaven rebuilt itself around your calling, the way a crown reshapes around a king's head, not to fit the old you, to fit the you that's about to emerge. The you that carries authority your ancestors only dreamed about. The you that walks in provision that defies every economic law. But here's what's going to wreck you. Here's the truth that should make you fall to your knees right now. Heaven didn't collapse on you, heaven collapsed for you. Every structure had to come down because what God was preparing to pour into your life couldn't fit in the old architecture. The collapse wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The breakdown wasn't rejection, it was reconstruction. Isaiah 43:19 promises, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." A new thing, not a restored thing. New. So let me ask you something that should shake you to your core. What if every prayer you thought went unanswered was actually being answered in a language you didn't recognize yet? What if God's silence wasn't absence but construction noise? What if the reason you couldn't hear him clearly was because he was too busy building to stop and explain every detail? If you're ready, if you're finally ready to stop mourning what collapsed and start receiving what's been built, type, "Rebuild me, Lord, right now." Not tomorrow, not when you feel worthy, right now. Because heaven has already finished the construction. The only thing left is for you to walk into what's been prepared. But I need to warn you about something. What God has built for you is so different from what you lost that you might not recognize it at first, and that's exactly where we're headed next. You want to know what really happened when heaven collapsed around you? You want to understand why everything felt like it was falling apart when you were trying so hard to do everything right? Let me tell you something that's going to shake you to your core. You weren't being punished, you were being promoted. Every crack in the foundation, every tremor that knocked you to your knees, every moment you thought God had abandoned you that wasn't destruction, beloved, that was reconstruction. Heaven wasn't collapsing on you. Heaven was collapsing the old order to make room for what you were about to become. Look at me, really hear what I'm saying. The divine rule you broke accidentally, it wasn't a mistake, it was a doorway. And when you stepped through it, everything changed. Think about Moses at the burning bush. Exodus 3-5 says, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." But here's what most preachers won't tell you. Moses broke protocol by approaching that bush. He left his sheep. He wandered off the path. He got curious about something that didn't make sense. And in that moment of breaking the expected pattern, God met him face to face and handed him the authority to deliver an entire nation. You did the same thing, you just didn't know it. When you prayed that prayer that felt too bold, when you asked God for something that seemed too big, when you stepped out in faith, even though every religious voice around you said, "Stay in your lane, know your place, don't reach too high." You broke the unspoken rule that says ordinary believers should stay ordinary. And heaven had no choice but to respond. Here's what they're not telling you in church, chosen one. Here's the truth that's been hidden from you for 70, 80, 90 years. When you break divine protocol out of pure hunger for God, when you cross boundaries not out of rebellion but out of desperation for more of His presence, heaven doesn't punish you, heaven promotes you. The earthquake you felt wasn't God's anger, it was God's architecture adjusting to accommodate your new rank. Let me break this down so you understand what you're carrying now, because you're not the same person who started this journey. The collapse changed you at a molecular level. Your spiritual DNA has been rewritten. First, you now carry authority over storms. Not just weather, I'm talking about the storms in your family, the chaos in your finances, the turbulence in your mind. Mark 4:39 shows us Jesus standing in a boat, waves crashing, disciples panicking, and He speaks 3 words, "Peace, be still." That same authority is now coded into your voice. When you speak to your circumstances, they have to obey, not because you're special, but because you broke through into a dimension where your words carry the weight of heaven's command. Second, your influence in spiritual warfare just got upgraded. You used to pray and hope something would happen. Now, when you pray, demons flee before you finish your sentence. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. But here's what happened when heaven collapsed around you. Those principalities now recognize your new rank. The enemy can't attack you the same way anymore because you're operating from a higher authority. Third, there's an acceleration on your purpose that defies natural timing. Things that should take years are going to happen in months. Doors that were sealed for decades are about to fly open. Why? Because Isaiah 60:22 declares, "The least of you will become 1,000, the smallest a mighty nation. I am the Lord. In its time I will do this swiftly." That word, swiftly, just activated over your life. The waiting is over. The delay has expired. Fourth, you now walk in divine clarity that cuts through confusion like a sword through smoke. You're going to know things before people tell you. You're going to sense what's coming before it arrives. You're going to have wisdom that makes people half your age stop and listen. 1 Corinthians 2:16 says, "We have the mind of Christ." That's not poetry anymore. That's your new operating system. Fifth, your angelic protection just got reinforced. Psalm 91:11 promises, "He will command His angels concerning you, to guard you in all your ways." But when you broke that divine rule and survived the collapse, heaven assigned you a different class of angels. Not just guardians, warriors, not just protectors, enforcers. You're walking with backup that hell can't penetrate. And sixth, your spiritual ranking has changed. You're not in the congregation anymore. You're not in the prayer line hoping someone will notice you. You are seated with Christ in heavenly places, exactly where Ephesians 2:6 said you'd be. But now you actually feel it. Now you actually walk in it. You survived a heavenly earthquake because you were made of the same stone God carved His throne from. Let that sink in. You didn't survive by accident. You didn't make it through by luck. You are still standing because you carry something indestructible, the very essence of the Eternal One Himself. But here's what breaks my heart. Some of you are sitting there right now with all this authority downloaded into your spirit, and you're still living like you're powerless. You're still begging when you should be decreeing. You're still hoping when you should be commanding. You're still asking if it's your will about things God already said yes to before you were born. Stop it. Right now. Stop it. If you're ready to step into what heaven just placed on you, if you're done playing small when God just made you massive, type in the comments right now, I step into my authority. Don't just read it. Declare it. Let heaven hear you. Let hell hear you. Let your own spirit hear you accept this mantle. Because here's the final revelation that will either launch you into your destiny or leave you stuck in the rubble of the old order. You're not the same person who broke the rule. You're the person heaven rebuilt the rules around. God didn't fix you to fit back into the old system. He shattered the old system to build a new one that could contain what He's placed inside you. You are the new standard. You are the new blueprint. You are the prototype for what God is doing in this final hour. So the question isn't whether you have authority. You do. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Chosen one, we've walked through fire together tonight. We've stood at the edge of the abyss and stared into the mystery that's been haunting you for years. You felt the weight of divine rules you never meant to break. You've carried the crushing burden of thinking you disappointed the Almighty. You've lived with that ache in your chest, that sense that something in heaven shifted because of you, and you couldn't figure out if it was judgment or something far more profound. But now you know the truth, and the truth is about to set you free in ways you never imagined. Listen to me carefully, beloved. Every moment you thought heaven was collapsing in disappointment, it was actually breaking open in anticipation. Every time you felt the pillars shake, that wasn't destruction, that was reconstruction. Every instance you believed you'd gone too far, pushed too hard, asked too much, you were actually stepping into the exact dimension of calling that required the old structures to give way. You didn't break heaven. Heaven broke open for you. Do you understand what this means? Do you grasp the magnitude of what I'm telling you? The God of the universe looked at your assignment, looked at your destiny, looked at the weight of purpose He placed inside your DNA, and He said to the angels, "Tear down the walls. This one needs more room. This one carries something too big for the old boundaries." Jeremiah 29:11 declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." But here's what most people miss. Those plans are so massive, so unprecedented, so beyond the ordinary, that the architecture of heaven itself had to expand to accommodate them. Think about what happened when Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. Matthew 3:16 says, "The heavens were opened to Him." Not the clouds, not the sky, the heavens. The very realm of God split wide because something new was entering the earth, something so powerful that the barrier between heaven and earth had to crack. That's what's been happening to you. You thought you were in trouble, you were in transition, you thought you were being judged, you were being prepared, you thought you broke something sacred, you unlocked something eternal. But here's where it gets urgent, and I need every ear in this room, every eye watching this screen to hear what I'm about to say. The collapse you've been feeling guilty about, that collapse saved you from a life too small for your calling. That breaking you've been apologizing for, that breaking was God's mercy, preventing you from settling for a destiny that would have killed your spirit slowly over decades. How many more years are you going to carry shame for something that was actually your graduation? How many more nights are you going to lie awake feeling like you failed God when He's been throwing you a celebration in heaven? How many more prayers are you going to whisper, asking for forgiveness when He's been shouting from the throne, "You're not a disappointment, you're a disruptor, and I sent you to shake things up"? Romans 8:28 promises us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." All things, not just the pretty things, not just the comfortable things. All things, including the moments you accidentally shattered divine protocol because your anointing was too big for the container. You are not under judgment, beloved. You are under construction. You are not a violator. You are a vessel. And God is not done rebuilding heaven until it matches the destiny inside you. Right now, at this very moment, there are angels in the throne room watching your response. There are prayers that have been stored in golden bowls waiting for you to say yes. There are assignments that have been on hold because heaven needed you to understand that your breaking wasn't your disqualification, it was your commissioning. Isaiah 43:19 declares, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? The new thing isn't coming, chosen one. The new thing is you. You are the thing that required heaven to collapse its old structures. You are the reason the rules had to bend. You are the answer to prayers that were prayed before you were born. But none of this matters if you don't respond. None of this activates if you stay in the prison of guilt. None of this manifests if you keep apologizing for being exactly who God designed you to be. So here's what I need you to do right now. If this message awakens something in your spirit, if you finally understand that your innocence wasn't ignorance and your accident wasn't an error, I need you to write, "I rise now," in the comments. Don't think about it. Don't question it. Just let those 3 words be your declaration to heaven that you're done carrying shame for breaking rules that were never meant to hold you. And then, I need you to share this message. Share it with that family member who's been feeling guilty for being different. Share it with that friend who's been apologizing for being too much. Share it with every chosen one in your life who needs to know that heaven didn't collapse in anger, it collapsed in anticipation of what they're about to become. You are not a mistake. You are a mystery. You are not a problem. You are a prophecy. You are not the reason heaven fell. You are the reason heaven is rebuilding itself around a bigger, bolder, more magnificent plan. The collapse is over, beloved. The reconstruction has begun. And you, yes, you, sitting there with tears in your eyes and fire in your spirit, you are the blueprint heaven is using to design what comes next. God bless you mightily. Walk in your authority, own your calling, and never ever apologize again for being exactly who heaven built you to be.